But up next, we have Naveed Srivastava from Amazon Web Services. Naveed is a principal solutions architect and is responsible for helping provider organizations and healthcare companies to deploy data lake, data mesh, electronic medical records, devices, and AI ML-based applications, while educating customers about how to build secure, scalable, and cost-effective AWS solutions. In his talk, he will explore how you can also adopt a modern data strategy, scalable data governance, and mesh on AWS.
Thank you so much. And let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, thank you, everyone. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It was really great to hear the speaker in the previous session. It really resonates really well with what we are trying to do here at Amazon Web Services and industry in general, that how data and data strategy is so important for driving insights and for, of course, building the next generation models. I hope everyone can hear me. I mean, I know that we've talked about the fair data principle before my session. We're going to talk about after my session. It is such an important topic that I would like to take a few minutes to actually go through them. And one thing that is really important and critical for a data strategy to function and for customers to succeed is to really understand that how this fair principle applies not only in a data mesh scenario, but in general, data governance or data lake or data fabric, what have you. What we have done on this slide, we've also added another component, we call it Flair, because we also believe that lineage is also supreme important. Most of you probably would agree with me, but lineage is one component of data governance, which is becoming more and more critical, especially in the areas where you really want to see how data has transformed from point A to point Z and what different sort of transformation a table or data set has taken. So really quickly covering on this, speaker before me spoke about how findability of data is really critical. A lot of times we know that the consumers within an organization really struggle to find the right data, like where is the data located, who's the owner of the data, what was the refresh rate of the data, just in general, how to find data. In many cases, a consumer may not be a technical person who understands the schema of the data also, right? So you want to provide a mechanism by which a consumer is able to locate the data based on business taxonomy, business glossaries, and all that. And also lately, we have seen a lot of knowledge graph-based findability opportunities as well. So finding data is really, really critical. It is extremely important to do basically reduce the data duplicates all over the organization and to really build a self-serve workflow through the data can be found easily. I'll come to lineage in a second, but accessibility is the next step, wherein as a consumer, I was able to find my data. And then what do I do with that, right? So I see that this is the data that I want. This is exactly what I was looking for. It has all the information that I need. But then I don't want to pick up a phone, send emails, as messages to people all around the organization to get access to the data. Can that be done in a self-serve way? By which I do not mean just grant access data to everyone. What I really mean is that there has to be a mechanism by which a consumer can easily request access to data. And of course, interoperability, healthcare life sciences is big on that, different standards, different formats, OMOP, CDIS for clinical trial, of course, HL7, FHIR, you name it. How you can build an ecosystem through which data interoperability can be achieved. Data can come in different modality, different delivery mechanism, and so on and so forth. And of course, reusability of data is extremely important too. Can you build reusable asset in your data strategy? One example is, of course, building the master data management, but there are others too. Can I build a reusable catalog? Can I rebuild a reusable architecture for me to really implement the solution out there? And like I said, coming back to lineage, extremely important. I really want to understand how the data has transformed right from the place it got ingested into my ecosystem to the point when the business metrics were realized. So all in all, fair data principle or FLAIR data principle is really the key component. If you really go deep into each one of these topics, you will see that they each kind of takes their own different journey to implement, but they have to work together. I just want to call on this data. It's a bit dated, but it's from IDC. that talks about that 85% of business wants to be data-driven, but only 37% have been successful. Now, I understand this data is pretty dated. Maybe the difference, the gap is much larger than what it is in there, or much smaller. The point is that why that is the case, right? And one of the reason why several organizations they do not fulfill, or they don't fully succeed in the data strategy is because the very important component of data strategy is missing, and that is governance. Data governance, I always say, if you ask like 10 people in a room and ask them what data governance is, you might get different answers, right? So it is important for us to kind of understand what data governance is, why it is so important, why it is a precursor to any data strategy, and how it can be sort of aligned with the fair data principle, and of course can be implemented on a platform, AWS. So really taking a step back a little bit before coming back to the governance, modern data strategy for better business outcomes, our point of view is basically you want to create an ecosystem where you unify, innovate, and modernize, right? So what we mean by that is that, how you can take different data silos within your organization and then unify. But unify may not mean all the time to create a centralized data lake, as an example, but it could also mean that, can I build a good, findable, accessible solution through which I can unify different lines of businesses within an organization. And there are several tools out there, there are several services out there that you can potentially utilize. Once you unify the data, of course, the data consumers, data scientists, data analysts of the world, they have, they can innovate much faster. I think one of the speakers was showing a slide where the 80% of the journey is actually getting the data right. And I fully agree with that. Innovation can happen only if you have the right amount of data. But then once you have the right amount of data, that what can you do to innovate, right? How fast you can innovate? Are you still limited by the tools that you have? Are you still limited by the services that you utilize? And that's where Amazon Web Services does offer a wide variety of services, like Amazon SageMaker for machine learning build, Amazon QuickSight and QuickSight Q for dashboard and NLQ processing, of course, Amazon Athena, as a way by which you can implement federated query architecture. And then final pillar, and this goes in a circle because you can start from anywhere, depending on the maturity of the data and the organization, is the modernize, right? So typically, we've been using databases which are sort of fit for all kind of purpose. If you have a database, let's just bring in images into that. Let's just bring relational data structure into that and store the unstructured or a semi-structured data as a blob or a glob, right? I'm not saying that everyone does it, but typically, I've seen a lot of projects where the database stack is not modernized, right? So how can you modernize database stack? One of the key things there is to use a purpose-built data set for the data modality that you're using. So if you have a semi-structured database, if you have an unstructured data, if you have images, if you have relational data, not necessarily you want to store in the same place. How you can modernize based on data modality. And then once you modernize, how much you really want to manage, right? How you want to manage by yourself or your database administrator, or how much you want it to be managed in a self-serve way. Extremely important. All these pillars are driving towards a modern data strategy, and none of this is complete on its own. You really have to, kind of work them together. Just a little bit on the action, how this modern data strategy works on AWS. Is that, at the very center of it, like I said in my previous slide, is the governance is very important, right? So having a catalog where on the left-hand side, you have all the data sources. On the right, of course, you have people, process, and devices. So how you can connect the dots there, right? And, it's important for any consumer, like people, apps, devices, anything that you may have that is consuming the data, it is important for them to find it first, right? And then for that, you need a catalog. Catalog can be of different kinds. There are business catalogs that has business glossary, business taxonomy. There could be a technical catalog that explains how data is structured, the schema, the refresh rate, and all that. And of course, the relationship that I was explaining before. Can you find the data based on certain hierarchies, certain relationship interlinked, like in a knowledge graph? So which is an important part of governance. But once you have the data, right? I mean, you can use services like machine learning services or the analytics services or business intelligence to really innovate on the data that you have just unified using a catalog as an example. And of course, you can modernize by a purpose-built databases, which is in the bottom of this diagram over here, or a data lake architecture supported by services like Amazon S3. This is sort of like I said earlier, is that if you ask 10 people in a room, it is possible that not everybody would agree or actually come to the same answer when you talk to data governance. So here's one view of it, and there are several views of it, of course. Data governance is the collection of people, process, and technology. It's not only technology. In an organization, you have different teams. You have line of business owners, the domain owners, who are the SMEs on the data. You have the consumers who knows how to best write the business insights. And of course, you have the governance team who's responsible for infrastructure, setting up the catalog, setting up the access governance and whatnot. So it is really important for all these three things to work together. Technology can only get you so far if you do not have a very good people process set up within your organization. So right at the center of the governance, the people process is the critical point here. Then if you go across this circle, you will see the other components of data governance, right? For example, I really want to profile and classify my data so that I can inform my customer. I can maybe mask certain columns. I can maybe hide certain columns, which are classified as an example. But definitely profiling, because as a consumer, I would like to know a little bit more about the data before I use it. Technical catalog is an important component of governance. This really gives you a way for your consumers to write query based on the schema of the data and whatnot. Data integration engines, part of data governance too. These are the pipelines through which you build the data. Now, I understand that there's a data pipelining ecosystem, which is sort of different than the catalog, but there are components that you would implement within the data pipelines that can support a governance model through which you are exposing your data product. Data quality, extremely important. There are different ways of doing data quality. A lot of work is done right now on predictive data quality, by which, what I mean by that is that you inspect my data, recommend the quality rules that I need to implement, and then implement it for me as a way for me to really achieve that high bar when it comes to data quality. Data lineage, we talked about that a little bit. Master data management, right? I mean, because we are in a model where, a data mesh-like model or any federated model where you may have different data coming from different lines of businesses, it is important for you to somehow correlate them, form some sort of a conformation model. So again, that is important. And the last but not the least, maybe the most important thing here is security and compliance, right? We are in the SCLS industry. We want to make sure that we adhere to every single compliance. Nothing is more important than patient data safety, security, and all that. You really want to make sure that you implement a model within a governance that would not only enable consumer to easily find and gain access to data, but also implement every single rule that it takes to make sure your data is secure. One way to do that is by implementing a fine-grained access control model, or FGAC. There are different ways to do that. I'm going to talk about one today. But implementing it in a way where you can actually specify the permissioning at the granular level, all the way to the columns and rows if you have to. But more importantly, between the data lineage, implementing the right data quality, security and compliance, you're really going for a model that would enable, checking off the boxes in compliance. Like I said, extremely important for all of us. Really quickly, taking a step back, so we understood a bit on governance, we understood a bit on FLAIR principle, and of course, the modern data strategy on AWS. This is a high-level view of the same diagram, a little bit more expanded in this case. If you can see on the left-hand side, we have a data sources that comes through an ingestion framework. The data can come in form of a stream, or it can come in form of batch. So I put services like Amazon Kinesis and AWS Glue as a way for you to kind of implement those models through which you can ingest different delivery mechanism of the data and different modality of data. And then a typical model is for you to have a raw zone of data simply ingested, a curated data zone, and a processed data zone. And then when you do all that, you end up creating a data product, right? That can be utilized by the people on the right side of this diagram, who are the consumers. So you would implement a discovery, lineage, catalog, etc. And for that, you can use AWS Glue as a service. For unified data access, you can use AWS Lake Formation, which is our service that would enable a fine-grained access control based on tagging mechanism. In a data mesh or a federated data world or data strategy, you can imagine that you will have hundreds and thousands of users against hundreds and thousands of data sources. And you really don't want to end up implementing unmanaged number of policies, right? Using our most fine-grained access control, you can greatly reduce the number of policies. As an example, you can say, okay, for any sensitive data, I'm going to create a tag called sensitive, and I'm going to associate every single columns and tables to that tag. And then you can simply give permission on the tag to the user you feel that needs access to sensitive data, as an example. On the right-hand side, once you find the data, get access to the data, is ready to be consumed. Numerous services, like I said before, Amazon SageMaker for building reusable sort of machine learning model, not only to build ML models using the SageMaker Canvas or Studio, but also to train it to the nth level in a most cost optimized way, optimize the model in a most cost optimized way, of course, deploy the model as well. Amazon Athena, managed Presto, is a way for you to federate your query across different data sources. And of course, Amazon Redshift is the data warehouse. All of this model, all of this data strategy is constantly being monitored by our services like CloudWatch and CloudTrail, and you can include other sort of the AI ML based approach to sort of look at the data pipeline, look at like the quality rules and all that to meet that. I'm just going to give you a quick example, like of one of the partners that I work with, one of the organizations that I work with, who were looking to build big biopharma, looking to build a data mesh solution. We're going to touch upon data mesh, but I just want to give you a little bit of overview of this. A data mesh solution wherein they wanted to bring multiple lines of businesses within their organization, connect the dots so that a consumer can easily take data from commercial and from research as an example, right? And then it is important, it was really important for us to kind of not only work on the technology side that AWS provides, but also to help coach the team at the customer on the people and process side of it as well, like I was saying earlier. So we implemented using a lot of AWS services, but also partner solutions through which we were able to implement a model of data mesh that would really enable their consumer to find data using a central catalog, to gain access to data by defining a self-serve workflow, and so on and so forth. We went live initially with one line of businesses, but over the last 8 months, we've been really successful in getting other lines of businesses on board as well. Coming back to the same flywheel that I was saying, it's not actually a flywheel, it's a circle we sometimes call as lucky charm bracelet, if you will. But it is the components of data that you have, the data governance. And the AWS services, like I was saying before, that you utilize like Lake Formation for access control, Glue Data Catalog for tech catalog, Macy for classifying, identify the columns that you think PII, PHI enabled, CloudWatch, CloudTrail for monitoring, IAM and Lake Formation in combination to define that fine-grained access control, and backup and others. And of course, we have numerous partners that we work with to implement some of the other components of data governance. So taking a step back, we learned a little bit on FAIR. We talked about data governance and AWS approach and modern data strategy. Let's also take a look at some of the data sharing and governance challenges that we are seeing in the organization these days, right? Of course, large organizations have a complex application landscape driven by geographically separated units. So these are the different lines of business. They may exist in different lines, different geographical location. They still want to sort of work with one another or communicate with one another to drive certain business insights. And I understand the regulation, data localization rules and all that needs to apply as well. Business units have built data lakes and data warehouses as their analytical sources. So you go to a line of business and say, okay, we want you to participate in a central catalog. I understand you already built a data lake. And then how do you achieve that, right? Because they already have a sense of maturity. They already have a mature data lake within their own line of businesses. And then how you really bring them up to a central architecture is, again, governance challenge, right? Each business unit may have multiple internal applications to support their business, highly possible. It is generally believed that combining data sources across organizations will bring larger value, like we saw earlier. And in some cases, organizations end up creating a central data lake. Now, I'm not saying that creating a central data lake is such a bad thing or it should not be done. Of course, there are several patterns to support it. My point here is that it is possible that different lines of businesses, they build their own central data lake within their lines of businesses or subdomains within that. And it's all right? I mean, if they're able to drive the insight that they're looking for. But at the same time, you can realize a lot more potential and use cases if you really let those data lakes to be exposed through other lines of businesses. I want some data from commercial. I want some data from research. I want some data for my secondary use cases as some example. So in there comes a data mesh, like how can you build a model through which that you can enable the organizational wide sharing of data in a most secured way using the data governance pillar we just talked about, right? So what data mesh brings to the table, of course, it increases the data-driven agility within the organization, right? So you want to make sure that each line of business, they have their own SMEs, they are the owners of data. They know the data better than anybody else. And you want to really make sure that everybody in the organization is following that model instead of creating a block by taking months to move data to another data lake, then another month to give access to. It supports domain level governance, like I was saying before, that you really want to make sure that the governance model is, although looks like is implemented in a centralized way because of a catalog, but the implementation is largely decentralized, right? So a data product owner can make a decision who can gain access to data. So in that sense, it is implemented in a decentralized way. The tools can exist in a central location, and that's all right. So isolate data resource with clear accountability. So who is responsible for getting the data in the first place? Who is responsible for creating the data as a product? Now, data as a product is different than creating a data set, because when you say you're creating data as a product, you actually implementing a lot of principles and a lot of sort of the maturity in the data set before you say that, right? But who's responsible for creating the data product? Who's responsible for making sure it remains updated and retired and recycled at some point in time, right? Who's responsible for managing the governance, tooling, who's responsible for DevOps and all those things. You really need to identify the clear responsibility and accountability as part of the people, process, technology that I was saying before. And consider data as a product which can exist in any system. This is really important, right? You want to build data as a sidecar pattern, which is a pattern that says that you really build as a loosely coupled product, so that any affordances around the data product can easily work with it without you having to worry about how you kind of make it work with every single component of the architecture. This is a high-level diagram of data mesh architecture on AWS. This is, like I said, think of it like 50,000 feet or 40,000 feet diagram. Of course, as you drill more, as you work with AWS services and our teams and our partners, of course, you're going to see much more depth in there. And I do understand some of you may not have worked with AWS previously, so I just want to stay at a level where we all can connect the dots here. At the very bottom of this diagram, we have multiple data lake solution. I was saying earlier that it is possible that each line of business, they have created their own data lake, data strategy solution. So at the very bottom, we have multiple data lakes stored in Amazon S3, which is our object storage solution, and is the widely most used data lake storage solution. And of course, more than that, all around, right? So in this case, the customer has built the data lakes using S3. There are three lines of businesses. I've represented 1, 2, and 3, which is nth, because you can have more than that. And then at the very top of this diagram, we have different types of consumer. You may have some consumers who are actually looking to build a pipeline on their own. They want to do further data transformation, writing their own like Spark, Hadoop like jobs, or Hudi and whatnot. But some consumers just want to create a machine learning model, and some consumers, they just want to create a data analytics dashboard. And that's, so you have different types of consumer. How do these consumers connect with multiple data lakes? One way to do that, of course, they can directly access all these independently, but then you actually do not have a central way of controlling how the access is granted, how the data is found, and that would lead into a much more bigger chaos than having one-on-one relationship. So the way you would do that, you would implement a central federated governance model. And this central federated governance model actually works in a much more decentralized way, right? So a central governance model would comprise of unified policy management. I was saying earlier that you want to include a self-serve workflow through which access can be requested. You want a fine-grained access control model and all that. You want to implement a centralized governance and audit for all the compliance and regulation purposes. You want to make sure the access granted is federated, right? And then, of course, you want to make sure that organization-wide sharing is enabled. So a central federated governance will enable all those functionality by which and through which your consumers can easily access data across multiple data lakes within an ecosystem. Data mesh is a foundation. So as you can see in this case, so data mesh really enables a producer to be a consumer and a consumer to be a producer too, right? So as a producer, you're responsible for creating a product. You are the SMEs, but once you create the data product, you're responsible for maintaining it. But then somebody else is responsible for making it available in the catalog, right? Someone else is responsible for making sure that a self-serve workflow is created through which a producer of data can grant access. But each domain within an organization, they can have their own data lake. They can have their own architecture. You just want to make sure that there's a way for them to really work in a model through which data can be marketed, if you will, or exposed or listed in a catalog. In a way, where a producer can create data, be that producer, but once a consumer uses the data, they can also be a producer, right? They create something in a warehouse or a dashboard or a machine learning model. They think it can be utilized by other consumers, so they can be the producer as well. So this model using AWS services enable that. As you can see in each one of these boxes, each one of these domains, the central data lake is created. And then you have several affordances of the data around it. I'm going to skip slide in the favor of time. I think I'm about time, right? 5 minutes left or something. So the data product characteristics, a really important topic here. You want to make sure your data product are autonomous. They have a very good mechanism of DevOps or any other way for you can create autonomous data product. The idea here is to bring the cost of producing data minimal, right? So that you can really work with it. Data product must follow a sidecar pattern. So meaning in another way, having a loosely coupled model so that you can have your different affordances of data can easily work within loosely coupled. Sorry, I'm at time.
Yeah, no need. We have to probably, go forward. Thank you very much. Do you have any final word or sentence so that we can move to the other?
Yeah, just I want to just leave it with this is that, as an organization, we must think about how we can create a model through which the data sharing can be enabled. Data mesh is one such paradigm, but remember, data governance is precursor to all of that, and it does include people, process, and technology. AWS provide wide variety of services on our platform through which you can implement a data governance and data mesh model.
Yeah.
More than happy to answer any questions or.
We are unfortunately out of time, but our team are, active on the Q&A session. So probably they would, with your help, they would answer other questions. But Thank you very much, Navneet. We really appreciate it. It was a lovely talk. And that brings us to the end of our keynote session.